Hey ecofictologists, my name is Lois and today I want to talk about why it is that the public finds the scientists so unrelatable and unapproachable. I mean, we don't bite much. There are so many resources online about this. The topic of science communication is huge and has been going on for years and years and years. I've made my way through a good few of them, and while we have made good progress, especially in the last few years, I'm going to give you the 5 most commonly cited reasons why there still exists a language barrier between scientists and the public. Now, 5 doesn't sound like a lot, but there's a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. Number 1, detail. We spend years and often decades studying one particular thing, becoming ever more specialized, to the point where even talking to scientists outside of our particular discipline is a challenge for many. The academic system is built on following strict guidelines on method and scientific integrity, with the goal of publishing in a high-impact, well-regarded, peer-reviewed journal, which just means that before your article goes out, other scientists, particularly experts in your field, read it, deem it interesting, scientifically sound, and bringing something new and adding value to the scientific field. So really, we publish in order to inform other scientists and their work. These kinds of papers include a lot of detail because one of the pillars of scientific study is reproducibility. And without being precise, we cannot publish a reproducible study. That's like giving you a recipe and saying mix some amount of flour with some amount of milk, leave it for some amount of time, stick it in the oven at some temperature for some time, and then voila! There you have it. That's what we did and it worked for us. No! Reproducibility standards means that anyone can check your work and there is less room for falsifying results. Scientific integrity is crucial. We need people to trust us. As I said, the whole point of publishing is to further the field of science. When a scientist reads a paper, they're not only interested in the what, they're also interested in the how. A detailed description of methods is expected should someone find opportunity to use the same method or to develop it further and explore something new. But this level of detail muddies the waters for anyone who's not familiar with the vocabulary or methods. Even other scientists, it can take me hours to read a paper if I have to go and look up terms and common practices. This becomes even more of a problem when you're talking to someone outside of the scientific field completely. I'll give you an example. If someone asks what I do, I say, oh, I'm a PhD student, and then they inevitably ask, oh, what's your PhD in? Now, I could say, I develop an eco-evolutionary individual-based modeling framework to simulate dispersal in a 3D environment, to predict rain shifts under a range of climatic conditions, and develop management strategies based on connectivity estimates using hydrodynamics and population structures and... Wakey. Where'd I lose you? But this is how I talk to members of the scientific community. This is how I would introduce myself at a conference and summarize my work. And I am nowhere near the most complicated, I assure you. If I said this to someone outside of academia, outside of ecological modeling even, probably, they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, I need to, yeah. And I'd be Billy No-Mates in the corner like that. So instead I have to do a couple quick calculations in my head. From what I know about this person, 1, how much scientific detail are they going to understand? And 2, how much do they care? So what I usually go for is, I code computer programs to predict how animals move in the ocean, hopefully to design networks of effective protected areas and to see how they react to climate change. I take out all that detail, I take out all the jargon, and we'll talk about jargon in a minute because that's its whole own category. And I focus on the point of it. What is the application? Why does my research matter to anybody outside of the scientific community? I love talking in detail about my work, and if the person is interested, they're welcome to ask more questions and I will ease them into the detail. But if they're not, then yes, I've outed myself as a nerd, but when is that really an insult? Let's be honest. But at least I'm not the, don't talk to her, she speaks in tongues, girl. The public like information that is memorable, meaningful, and miniature. The 3 M's of messaging, as identified by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. It's the classic case of the more you say, the less they hear. Number 2, jargon. It's not all about how much you say, it's also about how you say it, the language that you use. And the language of science is unfortunately not the same as the language of politics, policy, or the public. In my department, we hold seminars every week, and quite often I hear speakers say, I've taken such and such out for those of you who are not specialized. But still, most of those presentations wouldn't be very accessible to the public because our baseline of what is accessible and general knowledge is very different from the general public's. I got this handy little table from an article that was talking about communicating the science of climate change, which I will link to in the description below. These are some examples of words that have very different meanings to you than they do to me. Words like error or uncertainty, you hear those and you think the scientists don't know what they're doing, when really all we're trying to do is tell you how sure we are about what we're saying, because the uncertainty or the error around the observations is so small. And look at theory! Those things could not be more different. Do you know how much has to happen before a hypothesis is an accepted theory? Evolution is a theory, and it's one of the most widely accepted concepts in science. Something else that should be up here is the word likely. If you hear me say something is likely to happen, you'd probably think, oh, she's not so sure, or maybe she's taking a guess. It takes a lot for a scientist to say something is likely to happen. Likely for us is a measure of probability. It means we are statistically confident that something is more likely to happen than not. I bet you even think of something different than I do when I say the word protein. Oh, that looks good. Oof. And this is not even talking about the field-specific jargon that we use to explain our research. Number 3, access. This one is less the fault of individual scientists, I would say, and I do want to highlight that this gap between the scientific community and the public is not entirely the fault of the scientists themselves. We do still have to respond to pressures that are outside of our control. Publishing in academic journals is scientific currency. Everything from the job you get to the funding you receive to the reputation of the institute that you work for is dependent on which journals you publish in. Scientists pay to publish, and they often pay thousands of pounds to publish in high-impact journals like Nature or Science because it looks darn good on your CV and it validates your position in the scientific community. Unfortunately, this poses a conflict between wanting to put science out there for anyone who wants to access it and delivering on the expectations that are put on us by our institutions and our governments, because most journals are not open access, meaning free for anyone to read. Open access is just now kind of coming into force, and many of the highest impact journals are paid subscriptions that even institutions and universities have to pay. Due to the fact that scientific advancement is not publicly available, the public will turn to alternative outlets for their scientific news, and I'll be talking all about the dangers of that in a future video, so watch this space. Number 4, relatability. One of the most common pieces of advice when communicating anything to non-experts is know your audience. A lot of scientific research is science for science's sake because we want to know as much as possible about the world that we live in. This kind of research is really important for modelers like me who take that data and we plug it into our models on physiology, behavior, population structure, and so on to understand the species that we're studying better. Ultimately, so that we can predict them better and we can protect them better. And you never know what your research could lead to in the future. But the point is that we chose this profession and the majority of the public did not. Knowledge for knowledge's sake is not compelling enough for them to captivate their attention and convert it into action or participation. So we need to make it more relevant to them. For example, if you want to communicate about climate change, you could talk about its effects on the economy, public health, faith, defense, agriculture, beer, wine, coffee. The public responds well to analogies and metaphors that they can understand and relate to. Getting to the heart of their concerns and linking those concerns with science is going to help bridge the gap between scientists and the public. People do not like being lectured to, might feel a bit condescending, they might feel a bit alienated or judged. And lecturing brings me to number 5, structure. Lecturing is something scientists do very well. We love presentations. Our entire networking strategy is based on giving presentations and then talking to people about what we do. But effective communication is usually less of a lecture and more of a conversation, a two-way street where the scientists can also benefit from societal feedback. In general, the structure of our presentations mimic that of scientific papers. The introduction, where we talk about the main concepts, what's been done in the past, the gap in the knowledge, the motivation for investigating this particular thing, and a brief introduction for what we did. The methods, a very detailed outline of the steps that we took. Results, a presentation of the hard facts and figures without any kind of contextual analysis for what this means for the study, because that comes in the discussion, where we put all the results into context for you and explore the implications that they have for the field. We give you the take-home messages and we talk about where we could take these investigations in the future. Now, if I were talking to the general public and I only gave them the reason to care after 13 pages of blah blah, I'd be lucky if I had anyone left to talk to. Even if they were stuck sitting in an auditorium listening to me, they wouldn't be taking in what I was saying. They'd be thinking, good God, can she stop so I can have some lunch? I'm starving. I wonder what they've got on. Even worse if they had the option to just scroll right past me if I was trying to communicate on some other medium, like YouTube. Hey. No, stop scrolling, come back. We live in a scrolling society, my friends. Sad but true. People like stories. Often if I'm drafting a paper, my supervisor will talk about finding the storyline for it. So even scientists are not completely oblivious to the fact that a narrative makes a paper more fun to read. But the public needs even more of a narrative than scientists do, because the initial interest is not automatically there. They still need to be hooked in. The American Association for the Advancement of Science put together this little figure to illustrate the discrepancy between how scientists deliver a narrative and how the public would best absorb a narrative. Do you see the problem? The public needs to know why they should care first, so that they can then invest themselves and take in all the details that follow. They're not going to stick around for the payoff if they're not immediately interested. So there you have it. Those are my top 5 reasons for the language barrier between scientists and the public. Of course, I always want to bring it back to ecofiction because I do firmly believe that ecofiction can address each of these 5 concerns, but that would have made this video way too long. I'll be talking about all of that in the video next week, so if you like this kind of content, if you agree with what I've said, or you disagree and you want to have a conversation about it, hit that subscribe button and click the bell, and you'll be notified every time I upload a new video, including the follow-up to this one. So I'll see you next week, ecofictologists.